In the previous video, we put together a very simple front-end application in Express using POC templates, and in this video we're going to extend that application so that it can run a GraphQL query. So we already created a query variable here which we left empty, so what I'm going to do is now specify a query. So what I want to do is that on our index page I want to see a list of all our users. So I will say users and query for the ID and the name of the user. So of course now I need a way to execute this query. So this is my GraphQL query which now needs to be executed. And I could do that in here, but then I'm already thinking ahead a little bit here because later on I'm going to have some additional root handlers which will also require me to run some GraphQL queries and mutations, so it makes a lot of sense to extract the functionality of the GraphQL fetching into a function. So I'm going to create a function and name it fetch GraphQL, which should accept a query and variables, and if there are no variables I'm going to initiate the variables to be an empty object. Okay, and how do I execute a query? Well, to execute a query, I need to send this query to the GraphQL endpoint. So this is when I'm going to bring in the dependency that we have installed, which is node fetch, and I'm going to call fetch here, and we're going to go to localhost port 3000 / GraphQL. And remember, we need to use the HTTP method of post. I'm going to pass in headers. We'll pass in the content type header to have the value application JSON. And what I will send as part of the body is a stringified version of the query and the variables together, which is either going to be an empty object or an set of variables. And what I want to return is actually the response from this fetch statement. So I want to return the data itself. Now fetch uses promises, right? So fetch returns a promise, but I want asynchronous execution here. So I'm going to make this entire function asynchronous, and I can now use await here. So response is going to contain the response, and I want to take that response and convert that to JSON, and that's what I want to return. Now remember, response.json also returns a promise, and because of this we need to make this an asynchronous function as well, so that after we have the query we can get the final response and await fetch GraphQL and just pass in the query. So fetch GraphQL executes this code here which returns response.json, which returns a promise, and because it returns a promise we need to make sure that we await that. So we await the fetch API to convert the response that comes from here to a JSON format. So we now have the response. So what do we do with the response? Well, when you call the render methods, you can pass in a second parameter and you can specify what data you want to pass on to your POC template. So what we want to take is response.data.users. We just want to assign the result of the GraphQL query. We want to get the user list and assign that to a users variable, which then we can access in our index POC file. So how do I access that? So let's save this, go back to index.pog, and we can actually remove this from here. And let's see, so I'm going to type in an unordered list, and we can do something like this. For user in users, remember users is this property here that we can access very easily in POC, and basically we want to generate a list item for each user in the users array that we passed along from the root definition. And I'm just going to build a URL. And if I want to evaluate a particular value, so if I want to interpolate the username, I need to use the hash symbol, curly brackets, and then now I can type in user.name, so I can access the user name property from the user object. Okay, let me show you something else as well. So in root, what you can do, you can assign another property here. So let's call that intro, and I'm going to say welcome. I just want to show you how you can actually access that as well in the POC file. So let's have a paragraph in here, and if I have the equation sign here and say intro, then the text that I placed here, which is welcome with a smiley face, is going to be added to a paragraph here. So I don't need to use interpolation if I don't have anything else, or if I'm not accessing a property of an object. So let's save this and make sure that we restart the Node application as well. Go back to the browser, refresh the browser, and what we see now is the welcome, welcome message, and a list of users as well, with a link to the appropriate user page, which we're going to develop soon. So user/1, user/2, user/3. So what I want to do next is I want to make sure that if I click on any of these users, a user specific page is loaded in the browser. So that's what we will put together in the next video.